I've been waiting to do this for a long time, and I finally pulled the trigger. Alright, as many of you know, I occasionally airbrush weather my locomotives and rolling stock, and for years I've been wanting to shoot a series of videos showing you guys how I do my airbrush weathering, and at the same time I've wanted to scale up my airbrush weathering so that I can get more of my locomotives and rolling stock weathered. But the problem up until now is that my airbrush weathering setup was very quick and dirty. It was very amateur and not suitable for shooting videos. It was basically a pedestal in my garage. I had a box fan on one side to sort of blow the exhaust out of the garage, and that was it. And what would happen was that, I could airbrush the models and that was fine, but paint would get everywhere. The paint particles would settle on everything in the garage. And back in the day when my garage was used mainly for storage and all there was were cardboard boxes and plastic tubs, that was okay. But nowadays I've got my workshop up there, so I've got tools and power tools and trains and models that are waiting to be reviewed. And so it's no longer acceptable to have paint particles settling on everything in the garage. And so because of that, and because I want to make videos about my airbrush weathering, for years I've been wanting to upgrade and get a proper spray booth, and so that's what I've done. Now I should say that you don't have to spend a lot of money on a spray booth. You can make your own with parts from Home Depot or Lowe's for between $100 and $200, and it'll be perfectly adequate. Or you can buy a pre-made booth from Pash or some other brand for about $300 or $400. But my problem with each of these options was that, for one, I didn't want to do a homemade booth because I wanted something that looked professional for my videos. And then also, the pre-made booths tend to be a little bit small, and that's fine for HO and N scale models, but for big O gauge trains and buildings, I wanted something bigger, something that could encompass my largest engine or my largest building. And so for that reason, I spent quite a lot of money on a large professional style spray booth. I bought the Pash BBF4E1, which is a gigantic spray booth. It's 4 feet wide, 3 feet high, and 3 feet deep. But I wanted something that big so that I could airbrush weather anything in my collection. So the BBF4E1 runs about $1,400, and then by the time I'm done installing it, it'll be about $1,600. So it's not cheap, but this will allow me to do professional grade weathering for years to come. And the benefit for you guys is that I'll be able to do some really nice videos going forward. Anyway, because the spray booth is so large, you can't just pop it out of the box and plug it in and start using it. It requires quite a bit of prep work and quite a bit of setup. And so what I've got here is a two-part series. In part one, I'm going to show you all the work I'm doing to prepare for the arrival of the spray booth. And then in part two, we'll set up the spray booth and get busy weathering some trains. So what you're about to see is sort of a video blog of that whole process. I hope you enjoy it. Got another mess on my hands, and that's because I'm getting ready to install the airbrush paint booth back here in this back cubby. I cleaned it out earlier today. It was, there was a lot of storage here, a lot of boxes and so forth. There was a big set of cabinets I had to remove, but it's all empty now. I still have some of the stuff out here that I got to deal with and move somewhere. And then I went to Home Depot today and got the wood necessary to build the table that the paint booth will sit on top of. So there's all the wood. Got another shop light that looks like that. That's going to go back there in the cubby to give me some light. These are some canna seeds from my garden. And I got a bunch of electrical stuff for back there in the cubby to make the paint booth happen, because the spray booth, I don't think it comes with a plug. It comes with the electrical wires coming out of it, but you have to wire it up yourself. So what I'm going to do, on the other side of this wall, there's a socket in my washroom that the washroom plugs into. It's just a regular 120 volt socket. So I'm going to cut a hole here and add a new socket here that's connected to that other socket just on the same circuit. And from that socket, I'll be able to power the airbrush booth and the LED light above, and maybe an auxiliary light somewhere. And then of course, once the table is built in here and I've got the airbrush booth on top of it, I'm gonna have to cut a hole in this wall for the exhaust fan to vent the exhaust out the back of the house. And I'm probably also going to order a new batch of paints for my airbrush in a couple days, and that way, once the booth is here and I've got it assembled and working, I'll be able to start doing some airbrush weathering shortly after. So yeah, really excited about it, and there's more to come. Well, it's one day later, and back in here you can see I built the bench that the spray booth is going to sit on top of. Now the bench is structurally complete. I still want to add 1 or 2 shelves on the underside here for storage, and then I need to sand it and seal it, but structurally it's good to go. All right, it's the next day, and what I want to do now is get some electricity over here. Like I said before, I'm going to be adding a socket right about here that'll be an extension of the socket that's currently in my washroom. All right, here's the plug in the washroom, and this goes to my washing machine, so we'll unplug this for the moment. The new plug is going to go right above here on the other side of the wall. Now, if I take my voltmeter and stick it in this plug, you'll see that it's got voltage right now, about 120 volts. So let me go turn this off, and then we'll get to work. All right, we've got no volts, so we are safe to go to work. So I'm going to remove this faceplate for the time being. Go. All right, so we've got 2 wires connected to this socket plus the ground wire. So what I'll do is come off these 2 empty screw terminals and go to the new socket on the other side of the wall. So both sockets will be on the same circuit. Circuit. But that should be okay. This is a 20 amp circuit. The washing machine uses about 10 amps or so I've read when it's on. And like I said, the exhaust fan on the booth uses about 2 or 3 amps. So we should be just fine. This is the only thing on this circuit right now. So adding 1 more socket isn't going to be a big deal. So what I'll do now is drill a hole about right here, and that should come out somewhere on the other side of the wall in the cubby, and that will let me know where I need to cut the hole for the new socket. And by the way, the reason I'm doing it like this is because, you know, I would ideally prefer to have that socket on the other side of the wall on its own dedicated circuit. That would be great. But because of the location of the cubby and the washroom here and the wiring on this side of the house, having an electrician come and run a new circuit down to the breaker box would be incredibly expensive, probably about $1,500, because it would be such a big pain in the butt. So that's why I'm doing it like this. All right, so I've got my drill and a really long drill bit, and I'm just going to go through here. And there we go. Okay, here's the stud. Keep in mind, I am not a professional, so I could be doing this all wrong. Yeah. I think this may work. Now, I noticed that the wire going to the other socket on the other side is coming down from above. So what I may do is pull the wire out of that socket into here, wire this one up first, and then go from this one to the one in the washroom. All right, I've disconnected the wires from the socket on the other side. So let's see if we can pull those through now. There we go. All right. So here's the wires that were going to the socket on the other side. I'm going to wire the new socket in here and then run a small wire from here, a set of wires from here down to the other socket. All right, so here's the wires coming from the other side that'll go to the plug over there. So I'll bring those up in here. There we go. All right, I've got the outlet back in place here in the washroom, and I've also spackled up that hole that I made. So I'm gonna go cut the breaker back on and we'll see if this works. All right, the power's back on, and as you can see, we've got voltage there. Let's go check the outlet in the cubby. Of course, this should work if the other outlet was working. Pretty sure bet this will work. And yeah, there it is. So we're good. I've cleaned up around the socket a bit, and last thing we'll do is put the faceplate on. And presto, we are good to go. All right, it's one day later. The shop is not quite as messy as it was yesterday, although it's still pretty darn messy. I've got a lot of cleanup to do. So we've got power back here. The next thing I want to do is add some light back here. It may not look that dark on the video, and you know, it's okay, but for spray painting models, I really want to have a lot of light so that I can really see what I'm doing. So I'm going to add another one of these LED shop lights. They make 3,200 lumens. They're made by Commercial Electric. I get these at Home Depot. They cost about 38 bucks, so they're relatively affordable, and they put off a good amount of light. I've already got 4 of these in the shop. 1, 2, 3, 4. And they do a good job, and they're very easy to hook up. You don't have to hardwire them. They have a cord that comes out, and you just plug it into any old socket. So we'll go ahead and hang this and get it hooked up. I'm gonna put it right above where I'm standing, right about there. When I install my shop lights, I prefer to use these 3/16 inch toggle bolts with hook eyes on the end. These go up into the drywall, and they do a really good job of securely anchoring the light, because I'm going to be pulling on the chain to turn the light on and off many times over the coming years. And I want to make sure that they're securely anchored and won't easily come out. And these toggle bolts do a good job of that. Ideally, you'd want to hook the shop light into the studs in the ceiling, but the studs don't always line up where you need them to be. And in this case, they're not where I need them to be. And so that's why I'm going to use the toggle bolts instead. All right, let's see what we got. Yeah, much better. Nice. Now I do find that the shop light plug here is a little bit obnoxious, so what I'll probably do is go get a low profile extension cord that has one of those flat plugs, and then put that here and then run it down and run this down to the extension cord, and that way it won't stick out so much. But yeah, loving the light. Look at that. 3,200 lumens of it. All right, the last thing I want to do, or rather the last thing that I can do until the spray booth arrives, is to add some electrical equipment to the underside of the bench here. So I've got a couple of these metal boxes, and I'll add them down here. One will contain a switch that will eventually switch on the paint booth. The other will contain an extra socket just in case I want to charge my phone or charge the camera battery while I'm shooting a video. And then from the socket, I'll have this connected to it, which goes to a plug, which will go into that socket that we just installed. And the reason I'm doing it like this is so that the entire paint apparatus is self-contained and not hardwired into the house. You know, I don't think I'm going to stay in this house for the rest of my life. I will have to move one day, and when I do, I want to try to make it as easy on myself as I can. It's already going to be a massive undertaking with the layout and everything, you know, and up here I want to try to avoid that, and so that's why I want this to be standalone, and the only thing that will connect to the house will be this plug. Now, of course, I'm also going to have to cut a big hole in the back of the house for the exhaust from the paint booth. But the exhaust vent I will leave in place when and if I move later on. I figure that'll be a plus if I'm trying to sell the house. I know if I was looking to buy a house and I went into the garage and I said, hey, it's already got a 240 volt outlet and it's got a ready to go exhaust port for any shop work I want to do, that would be a big plus for me. So that I'm not so worried about, but the rest of it, I want to have modular, more or less, so that I can remove it relatively easily if and when the time comes. Alright, I went ahead and plugged in the other end of this cord into that socket, so let's see what we've got here. Look at that. Good to go. Now, of course, I don't have this switch wired up yet. That'll have to wait until the spray booth arrives. But we're good here, and then once the booth arrives, I'll just run power up from here to the switch and the airbrush booth. All right, that about wraps it up for part 1. Stay tuned for part 2 when the gigantic spray booth arrives. That's it for now. I'm Eric Siegel, and I'll see you next time.